would like to introduce you to Theano Moussouri. She is the lecturer of museum studies at UCL in London, and she's worked for the Visitor Studies unit at the Science Museum for quite some time on large projects. And it seems to me that the Science Museum is kind of a breeding ground for audience researchers in the UK at least. Theano will discuss in her paper the wide opportunities but also limits and challenges of the use of smartphones and other technologies in audience research. Theano, please.
Thank you. So what I'll try to do this afternoon is focus more on the methodological part of using this kind of technology, how it can be used, and perhaps give you a glimpse of some findings, key findings, but looking at a particular case study, the London Zoo, where I work with a number of colleagues. So what I'd like to do and mainly focus on is the practical side of automated tracking, data capture and analysis, and how it can be integrated with more kind of traditional methods that we have used for a long period of time in visitor studies. I'm also going to touch on some of the options that we have these days, and I know that other people have talked about that in a different context as well, and what are the ethical implications. So again, the focus is more on the methodology side of this. And some of the benefits, so for those of you who are museum practitioners and would like to see how it can be used for audience research, what are the benefits, and some of the next steps where this technology can take you in terms of doing research, and some of the research I'm thinking of doing in the future. So is it this arrow? Yeah. Oh, it works. Okay, thank you. So to start with this study we did at the zoo, within a week, 5 working days, we collected a massive amount of data from 44 families. It was over the Easter holiday break in 2009. And that translates into 115 individuals, so quite a big group. And anyone who has ever done tracking studies around the whole site can appreciate how magical that is to be able to do that within a week and having one research assistant as well. So we did the whole site. Some of the visits lasted for 4 hours, and that's the nature of visiting a zoo, at least the London Zoo. So we combined it with a version of personal meaning mapping. We call it concept map because it's kind of slightly different the way we analyze the data. And we asked people to talk to us about their itineraries, and I call them imagined because they hadn't actually visited the space yet, and the expectations of the visit. We also collected data about their motivation, and I know that there are different systems of coming up with different motivation categories. I don't have time to go into a lot of detail about how my categorization system, but hopefully later today or tomorrow we can discuss that more. Then we did the tracking, where the focus was more on particular points of interest, where people went, and the amount of time they spent there, and the visitor flow, so the routes they took throughout the space. And then we did another concept map where people talked about or tried to reconstruct and remember their itineraries. And they talked about where they've been and how their expectations met what they actually did, and the meaning they made out of that. We did the analysis, and that was the first study, at least, that we knew of at the time. So we started with masses of data. We had the mathematician, computer scientist who did the analytics, and we were trying to form some hypotheses. So we started with some of the data we knew, the motivation and the concept maps, and we're trying to figure out how can we use those tracks now, and how can they be combined with other types of data. So with mobile technology, by the time you refer to something, it's obsolete. This was used back in 2009. I'm not sure if it's used anymore. It was called Open MoCo, mobile phone. So we came one mobile phone to each group. It was something that we controlled, so we gave it to them. They didn't have to do anything with it, just put it in their pocket or their backpack, and that's exactly what they did. It captured very detailed tracking information. There was a log, there was logs every second, so it was very, very detailed. And the mobile phones had GPS, so and that's something you can use in an open spaces only. We expected it not to work in the indoor spaces of the zoo, but it actually did, because the ceiling was very, very thin. But I'm not sure you can use it in any other kind of museum. Okay, and that's, for those of you who understand the latitude and longitude, it shows you exactly where people are. And those are the readings that you get. And you really need to have someone who knows what they're doing, because I have no clue what this means. So I didn't analyze this. And we had that before. I don't have any blank slides. I'm not sure why this comes up. So once you do ask someone who knows what they're doing to do, ask the questions, do the analytics. One of the things that you can very easily do with the analysis is look at, where people have gone, how long they spend there, how long they spend in the whole site, but also at particular points of interest, exhibits within the zoo. And that's something that, as visitor researchers, we need to provide. What are the questions? Because the people who do the analysis don't know what the appropriate questions to ask are. But you can also, let me show you the video. If we click on this is quite amazing to see, again, for those of you who have done tracking studies, to be able to see and play and replay back as many times as you want where those families have been, and watch it again and again, if it works. It did work when we tried it before. So at the time, Google Maps, you could use them for free. Now it cannot be done anymore, but what happened was we got the Google Map application, and you can superimpose the tracking on the map. So you can see where those families go, and you can, do it in a different speed, but you can kind of guess how long it takes them to move from one exhibit in the zoo to the next, and also how long they stay within that exhibit area.
Sorry about that.
Okay. We have another. So we're going to watch the video. We have another solution as well. And while I'm on the timing and tracking issue, when you do more advanced analysis, one of the things that you can see is, for example, how long people spend at an exhibit area as opposed to a non-exhibit area, like the cafe or visiting the bathrooms. There's a playground in the zoo and other more social areas where there are no animals or habitats for you to go to. And for the 45 families we had, this was answered in 20 minutes. So again, it's amazing to be able to do that so quickly. and also to have an overview of the data, because I've done many tracking studies in the past, and if you try to analyze it by hand, you lose you try to get to the big picture. That's the point of doing data analysis, but it's really hard to have all of the data in one piece of paper at the same time. So it really makes research very different. Shall we try the video? So let's not crash the computer again. Sorry about that. Talking about technology. So we had many hiccups as well. We had more than 44 families in total, but some of the data didn't, great. So you can watch, if you follow that dot there, there's a red dot going around the red line. I'm not sure if you can see it. So that shows you the movement of that family. Is it number one that you click? That's right. Yeah. So that's one of the families. And you can actually see where they've been in the zoo. So you can play and replay that many times. Sorry, I think shall we move on? Sorry, we can watch the video again later. I was trying to occupy all the time that we were trying to make the technology work. Good. So the next point I wanted to make comes from one of the key findings, and it's something that I've worked with people, why people go to museums and how that affects what they do there. And John and I did a similar study, and you start forming hypotheses, and you think that this probably will happen. And it's just amazing when you get the type of data that help you answer that particular question. One of the strongest correlations we found, we looked at different types of data, the itineraries through the concept maps, how people talked about their itineraries before and after the visit, the amount of time they spent looking at exhibits, but nothing seemed to work apart from motivation. So there was a strong correlation between people who went to the zoo to learn something or affect someone else's educational experience or participate in that learning community that the zoo represents. And two other types of motivation, social event and entertainment. So those who wanted to learn just did that. So the visit route represented exactly what they wanted to do in the space. We suspected that they, on purpose, they avoided all the paths that took to the playground in particular, so that the kids wouldn't get distracted. They didn't have lunch in the zoo. They spent all their time at exhibits. There was zero time at any other social areas. Probably they had lunch, I'm sure they did, but not in the zoo. And then those who wanted to spend time with family, have fun in the zoo, spent quite a bit of their time, an average of 1/4 or 1/3 of the total time that they spent in the zoo. And that's quite a big chunk, especially because of the nature of the zoo visit. They do tend to spend the whole day. I have to say here that in the UK, museums are free, but the zoo, there's a high charge. So they do make the most of that day when they pay to get in. And so we looked at different points of interest with we tried to identify points of interest that came from the zoo, how people would look at points of interest. But one of the things we found was that it was actually the data that provided those points of interest coming from the visitors themselves. So here you can use data mining algorithms that give you an idea of the different features of the visit. I'm not sure if anyone has ever heard of the DB scan clustering algorithm. I have to read that out, okay? Don't worry, I haven't either. But that's what apparently was used to identify the specific locations of interest to visitors. And again, with those two families, you can see which exhibits they went to, and that the family apparently that went to the cafe had a very strong social or entertainment motivation. So that's another thing that you can do. And another interesting thing that maybe, I'm not sure if Meta, you've done something like that online, but a lot of web analytics look at how people navigate sites, and we try to use those ideas to see why what we call levy flight type behavior is it's actually observed in animals. So when they hunt or look for food, you look around the same area and you don't move very much, and then there's a leap. So you move to a different area without actually looking at anything else. And then you try to find food in that area or find what's about that exhibit in that area. So the routes that people took through the zoo were not homogeneous. They spent quite a lot of time looking at the same area, and then they would just jump off and go to something else. And we spend a lot of time thinking about what produces this kind of behavior, because we were not able to find any correlations. One of the things that we looked at, for example, is how people talked about their itineraries. But maybe that relates to what John mentioned earlier, that part of, those skills are stored or have to do with some different part of your brain, and spatial skills are quite different, so we couldn't find any correlation there at all. So still, if someone is interested in exploring that, that'd be great. And as Kelly mentioned as well, I mean, you have an option when you do research as well. You can either give people your own device or get them to use their own device. And in either case, I think there are pros and cons. So if visitors have their own device, you can track each individual person rather than a family and hope that they all stay together, for example. And there are some privacy issues, but not as big as there are quite big privacy issues as well, because although you may not want to collect private data, you do. And it's, how far do you go with that? Supermarkets do it all the time, but museums are not supermarkets. So it's something that we need to think about. If you provide your own device, then you get consistent data because you have control over the device and how the data is stored. You can also test the software and the devices, so there's less kind of margin for error there. One of the things that we very quickly found out was that you need that interdisciplinary collaboration. I see lots of people posting messages to different listservs these days asking about how to do analytics. Well, you cannot. You need someone who knows how to do it for you and to develop that report so that he or she knows what you need and understand your language. So it's quite, for me, it's quite blogging stuff. I just don't understand that. So you need that to happen. And also in terms of ethical issues, all the people involved in the research, especially if you use people's devices, need to have specific training, how to avoid collecting private data. So just to finish with some ideas here that I've already discussed. So we started with qualitative data and started forming hypotheses in order to help us make sense of the amazing amount of the tracking data. But we also were very lucky to have that amount of tracking data, because one of the things that people in museums agonize is how do you segment audiences. And although we started becoming more sophisticated about our approaches, I think that there's value in letting or understanding the natural groupings that form in museums. So how do people use the space? What can we learn from that about how we segment our audiences? So as probably you have guessed, we did collect a large amount of data very quickly and at a very low cost. And we were able to do different types of analysis. The data we got were high resolution and very, very accurate. And one of the things we'd like to explore now is technology that help you do the same in indoor spaces, especially object-rich environments where you have glass cases full of objects. And the other thing, currently, we're doing a study which is kind of slightly different but related to this one, looking at links between motivation and embodiment. So thinking about how people kind of think about something, but also what they do with their body at a kind of micro level at the exhibit phase, focusing mainly on interactive exhibits. And the Natural History Museum from London is one of the case studies. So we've just collected all of the data, but we haven't started analyzing yet. So one of the things we're interested in is not just why people visit those interactive spaces, but what keeps them ticking, what kind of gets them from one place to the next. Why do they still care while they're there to keep visiting the museum? Why don't they get bored and leave? So it's a different kind of level of motivation. And I'd like to finish with the credits. The people who helped along the way. Thank you very much.